The stranger stumbled through the white wall of snow, each step forward a battle against wind that shrieked like dying wolves, and collapsed against a cabin door just as her legs gave out beneath her. Inside, Preston Whitmore heard the thump against his door over the howling blizzard that had been raging for 3 hours now. He set down the coffee he had been nursing and moved toward the entrance, his hand instinctively going to the revolver at his hip. Out here in the Oregon Territory, 20 miles from Oregon City, visitors were rare enough in good weather. In a February storm like this in 1875, they were downright suspicious. He pulled open the door and found her there, a woman crumpled against the frame, her dark cloak covered in so much snow she looked like a frozen sculpture. Her lips had gone blue, and her breathing came in shallow gasps. Preston did not hesitate. He bent down, scooped her into his arms, and carried her inside, kicking the door shut against the wind that tried to follow them in. "Madam, can you hear me?" he asked, setting her down near the fireplace. She did not answer, her eyes fluttering but not quite opening. He worked quickly, removing her frozen cloak, and the layers beneath that had gone stiff with ice. Her dress was quality fabric, he noticed, dark green wool that spoke of money or at least comfort, not the clothes of someone who should have been wandering alone in a blizzard. He wrapped her in every blanket he owned, then set about stoking the fire until it roared with heat. He heated water and made strong coffee, then knelt beside her and brought the warm cup to her lips. "Come on now, you need to drink this." Her eyes opened then, and he found himself looking into the palest gray eyes he had ever seen, like morning fog over the Columbia River. She took a sip, coughed, then another sip. Color began to return to her cheeks. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "I thought I was going to die out there." "You nearly did. What in God's name were you doing out in this storm?" Preston sat back on his heels, studying her. She was young, maybe 22 or 23, with dark hair plastered to her skull from the melted snow. Even half frozen and bedraggled, he could see she was beautiful. "My horse threw me," she said, her teeth still chattering. "About 2 miles back, I think. Maybe more. I could not tell in the snow. I just kept walking, and then I saw the light from your window." "You walked 2 miles in this?" Preston shook his head. "You are lucky to be alive. Most people would have laid down and let the cold take them." "I am not most people," she said, and despite her condition, there was steel in her voice. She tried to sit up, then winced and fell back against the blankets. "My ankle. I think I twisted it when I fell." Preston moved to examine her ankle, which had already begun to swell. He pressed gently, and she hissed in pain. "Not broken, but badly sprained. You are not going anywhere for a while, even if the storm clears, which it will not for days." "Days." She looked alarmed. "But I have to get to Oregon City. I was supposed to arrive yesterday." "The storm has other plans, madam. I am Preston Whitmore, and this is my ranch." "Well, what passes for a ranch? Mostly I run cattle and break horses for the settlements." "Fiona Crawford," she said, extending a hand that still trembled slightly. "I was traveling from San Francisco to meet my brother in Oregon City. He is supposed to be expecting me." Preston took her hand, feeling the chill still in her fingers. "Your brother will have to wait. Nobody is traveling in this weather. The snow is already 3 feet deep and still coming down. We will be lucky if it does not bury the cabin entirely." Fiona looked around the cabin for the first time, taking in the single large room with its stone fireplace, sturdy furniture, and surprisingly neat arrangement. Books lined a shelf on one wall, and cooking pots hung in orderly fashion near the stove. A bed occupied one corner, covered with a thick quilt, and she realized with a start that she was lying on a pallet of blankets on the floor near the fire. "I am sorry to impose on you like this," she said. "I know this is highly improper." Preston almost laughed. "Madam, propriety takes second place to survival out here. You stay here until that ankle heals and the storm passes, and I will not hear another word about it. You can have the bed. I will sleep on the floor." "I could not possibly take your bed. You are injured and you nearly died." "You will take the bed." His tone left no room for argument. "Are you hungry? I have stew from yesterday. It is not fancy, but it is hot." Fiona realized she was starving. "Yes, please." Preston ladled out a generous portion of beef stew and brought it to her with a hunk of bread. She ate ravenously, and he found himself watching her with an odd feeling in his chest. It had been a long time since he had shared his home with anyone. 3 years, in fact, since his father had died and left him this ranch. He had gotten used to the solitude, or so he thought. "How long have you lived out here alone?" Fiona asked, as if reading his thoughts. 3 years. My father and I built this place together, worked the land. He died of pneumonia one winter. Since then, it has just been me and the horses and cattle." He poured himself more coffee and sat in the chair near the fire. "What about you? What brings a lady from San Francisco to Oregon Territory?" Fiona set down her empty bowl. "My brother is all the family I have left. Our parents died last year, my mother from influenza and my father 6 months later from a broken heart, I think. Thomas came out here 2 years ago to work in the lumber industry. He has done well for himself, and when our parents passed, he wrote to me and said I should come live near him. Start fresh. That is a long journey for a woman alone. I can take care of myself," she said defensively, "or I can usually. I have made it from San Francisco to here without incident until today." "I did not mean to suggest otherwise," Preston said mildly. "But the trail from here to Oregon City is rough country even in good weather. You hired a guide." "I did, but he abandoned me 3 days ago when we stopped at a trading post. Said he had gotten a better offer to lead a party south. I decided to continue on my own. I had a good horse and a map." Preston felt a flash of anger at the guide who had left her. "A man like that deserves a thrashing. You could have died." "But I did not. I found your cabin." She met his eyes. "You saved my life, Mr. Whitmore." "Preston," he said. "If we are going to be sharing a cabin for the next few days, we might as well use first names, and I only did what any decent person would do. Nevertheless, I am grateful." She yawned suddenly, exhaustion washing over her face. "I am sorry. I am so tired." "That is the cold leaving your body. You need to rest." Preston stood and helped her to her feet, supporting her weight as she hobbled to the bed. She sank onto it with a sigh of relief. "This is very kind of you," she murmured, her eyes already closing. Preston pulled the quilt over her and added another blanket for good measure. "Sleep. We can talk more when you wake." He returned to the fire and settled onto the pallet of blankets she had vacated. Outside, the wind continued to scream, and snow pattered against the windows like thrown sand. He listened to Fiona's breathing slow and deepen as she fell asleep, and found himself thinking about how his quiet, solitary life had just been turned upside down. He had told her the truth when he said he had been alone for 3 years. What he had not mentioned was how the loneliness sometimes ate at him, especially during the long winter months when the snow kept him confined to the ranch. He had grown used to talking to his horses, to going weeks without seeing another human face. He had convinced himself he preferred it that way, that the pain of losing his father had made him want to avoid forming new attachments. But now there was a woman sleeping in his bed, a beautiful stranger who had literally fallen at his door, and Preston felt something stirring in his chest that he had thought long dead. He told himself it was just the novelty of having company, nothing more. In a few days, the storm would pass, her ankle would heal, and she would continue on to Oregon City and her brother. His life would return to normal. The wind rattled the door, and Preston got up to check the fire and make sure the cabin was secure. The storm showed no signs of letting up. If anything, it seemed to be getting worse. He had plenty of supplies, enough to last them a month if needed. The animals in the barn were safe and had feed and water. All he had to do was wait it out. He glanced over at Fiona, seeing only the dark fall of her hair on the pillow in the firelight. She had spirit, he would give her that. Not many people would have survived that walk through the blizzard. She was strong, determined. And she had come out here to start fresh, just like his father had done when he brought Preston west as a boy. Preston settled back onto his makeshift bed and closed his eyes, but sleep was a long time coming. When Fiona woke, it took her a moment to remember where she was. The cabin was warm, almost too warm after the cold outside, and her body ached in a dozen places. Her ankle throbbed dully. She sat up carefully and saw Preston at the stove, cooking something that smelled wonderful. "What time is it?" she asked, her voice still rough. "Nearly noon. You slept 14 hours. Preston turned with a smile that transformed his face. She had not really looked at him the night before, too cold and disoriented to take him in properly. But now, in the gray light filtering through the snow-covered windows, she could see him clearly. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and the lean, muscled build of a man who worked hard for his living. His hair was dark brown, almost black, and fell to his collar. His eyes were a deep blue, striking against his tanned skin. He had a strong jaw shadowed with stubble, and when he smiled, a dimple appeared in his left cheek. He was, quite possibly, the most handsome man she had ever seen. Fiona felt heat rise to her cheeks and looked away quickly. "I am sorry. You should have woken me. You needed the rest." "How do you feel?" "Like I was trampled by a stampede," she admitted. "But better than last night. Warmer, at least. Good. I made flapjacks and bacon. Come eat." He helped her from the bed, and she hobbled to the table on her one good foot, leaning heavily on his arm. His strength was evident in the easy way he supported her weight. The food was simple but delicious, and Fiona ate with enthusiasm. "You are a good cook," she said. "I've had 3 years to practice. When you live alone, you either learn to cook or you starve." Preston poured coffee for both of them. "The storm is still going strong. I went out to check on the animals this morning. The snow is up past my knees now. How long do you think it will last? Hard to say. 2 days, maybe 3. Then we will need to wait for your ankle to heal before you can travel. A week, perhaps? A week alone in a cabin with a strange man. It should have frightened her, but somehow it did not. There was something solid and trustworthy about Preston Whitmore, something that made her feel safe despite the impropriety of their situation. "I hope my brother will not worry too much," she said. "He will not be expecting me in this weather, will he? No one with any sense travels in a blizzard like this. He will know you found shelter somewhere." Preston leaned back in his chair. "Tell me about San Francisco. I have never been to a big city." Fiona described the busy streets, the fog that rolled in from the bay, the grand houses on Nob Hill where she had lived with her parents. She told him about the opera and the restaurants, the cable cars and the bustling port. Preston listened with evident fascination, asking questions about things she took for granted. In turn, she asked about his life on the ranch, and he told her about breaking wild horses, about long cattle drives to market in Oregon City, about the freedom and hardship of living on the land. He spoke of his father with deep affection and obvious grief. "He sounds like he was a good man," Fiona said softly. "The best. He taught me everything I know about ranching, about being honorable, about treating people right. He would have liked you." Preston seemed surprised by his own words and looked away. I mean, he always appreciated people with courage, and it took courage to walk through that storm. Or stupidity, Fiona said with a rueful smile. I am still not sure which. They spent the rest of the day talking, and Fiona was surprised by how easy it was. Preston was educated, she discovered. His mother had been a teacher back in Missouri before she died when he was young, and she had instilled in him a love of reading. The books on his shelf ranged from Shakespeare to agricultural manuals, from adventure novels to poetry. I would not have pegged you for a poetry reader, she teased. Why? Because I am a cowboy, he grinned. Cowboys can appreciate beauty in words just as much as anyone else. Read me something, she said impulsively. Preston looked embarrassed but pulled down a worn volume of Tennyson. In a surprisingly rich voice, he read from The Lady of Shalott, the words flowing like music in the warm cabin. Fiona closed her eyes and listened, feeling something shift in her chest. When he finished, silence filled the space between them. That was beautiful, she said quietly. It is a sad poem. The best ones usually are. She met his eyes and saw something there that made her breath catch. Preston cleared his throat and stood abruptly. I should check on the animals again. The horses need to be fed. He bundled up in layers of clothing and went out into the storm, leaving Fiona alone with her swirling thoughts. She was being foolish, she told herself. She had known this man less than a day. The storm and the isolation were making her feel things that were not real. Once she got to Oregon City and her life there began, she would forget all about Preston Whitmore and his blue eyes and his voice reading poetry in the firelight. But even as she thought it, she knew it was a lie. Preston stood in the barn, ostensibly checking on the horses but really just trying to get his head straight. What was wrong with him? He had known Fiona Crawford for barely a day, and already she had gotten under his skin in a way no woman ever had. He found himself hanging on her words when she spoke, watching the way the firelight caught in her dark hair, wanting to make her smile just to see the way her whole face lit up. This was dangerous. She was a city woman, refined and educated, used to the finer things in life. What did he have to offer her? A rough cabin, hard work, isolation. She was here by accident, trapped by the storm. Once it passed, she would go to her brother in Oregon City and forget all about the cowboy who had taken her in. But God, he did not want her to go. Preston fed the horses and checked the cattle in the adjoining shelter, making sure they had enough hay and that their water had not frozen. The animals were restless from being cooped up, but they were healthy and well protected from the storm. He had built this barn with his father, made it sturdy enough to withstand anything the Oregon winter could throw at it. When he could not put it off any longer, he trudged back through the deep snow to the cabin. Fiona looked up when he entered, and the smile that crossed her face made his heart do something complicated in his chest. I was beginning to worry you had frozen out there, she said. Takes more than a little snow to freeze me. He shed his outer layers and hung them by the fire to dry. Animals are all fine. We are set for the night. That night, after a dinner of salt pork and beans, they sat by the fire and talked until late. Fiona told him about her childhood, about growing up as the daughter of a wealthy merchant, about the expectations placed on her to marry well and settle into society life. Preston told her about his mother's death when he was 8, about the journey west with his father, about learning to be a man in the wild country. Did you never want to marry? Fiona asked, then immediately looked embarrassed. I am sorry. That is too personal. No, it is fine. Preston stared into the fire. There was a girl once back before my father died, Rebecca Tanner. Her family had a ranch about 15 miles from here. We were courting, talking about marriage. But after my father passed and she saw how hard life here could be, how isolated, she decided she wanted something easier. She married a banker in Portland. She was a fool, Fiona said fiercely. Preston looked at her in surprise. You do not even know me. I know enough. I know you saved my life. I know you are kind and generous and you read poetry. I know you loved your father and you honor his memory by keeping this place going. That is more than most men can claim. She looked away, as if she had revealed too much. Rebecca Tanner did not deserve you. Something passed between them then, an understanding that went deeper than words. Preston reached out and took Fiona's hand, and she let him, her fingers curling around his. You should rest, he said softly. Your ankle needs to heal. Will you read to me again? So he did, choosing lighter fare this time, a humorous Mark Twain story that made her laugh. When her eyes grew heavy, he helped her to bed and then lay down on his pallet by the fire. But he did not sleep for a long time, too aware of her presence just feet away, too conscious of how empty his life had been before she stumbled through that door. The next 3 days fell into a pattern. Preston would wake early and tend to the animals, then make breakfast while Fiona woke. They would eat together and talk, sharing stories from their pasts, discussing books and ideas and dreams. Preston taught her to play poker with a battered deck of cards, and she won more often than she lost, much to his amusement. She taught him a complicated card game from San Francisco society. Though they both agreed poker was more fun, Fiona's ankle improved steadily, and by the 3rd day she could put weight on it, though it still ached. The storm finally began to abate on the 4th morning, the wind dying down to a whisper and the snow tapering off to occasional flurries. I should be able to take you to Oregon City in another day or two, Preston said, and the words felt like stones in his mouth. Once the main trail is passable. Fiona's face fell, though she tried to hide it. Of course, my brother will be worried. You could send him a message, Preston found himself saying. Let him know you are safe, but that you are delayed if you wanted. Why would I want to delay? He met her eyes. You know why, Fiona. The air between them crackled with tension. Fiona stood carefully, testing her ankle, and walked to where Preston stood by the window. Outside, the world was buried in white, pristine and beautiful in the weak winter sun. I do not want to go, she said quietly. Is that mad? I have known you less than a week, and the thought of leaving makes me feel like my heart is being torn out. Preston turned to her, his hands coming up to cup her face. Then stay. The storm brought you to my door, Fiona. Maybe it was meant to be. Maybe you were meant to find this place. Find me. I barely know you. Then stay and know me better. Stay a week, a month, stay forever. His voice was rough with emotion. I know it is fast, I know it is crazy, but I feel like I have been waiting my whole life for you to knock on that door. Tears filled Fiona's eyes. I feel it too. From that first moment, even half frozen and terrified, I felt it. Like coming home. Preston kissed her then, gently at first and then with growing passion. Fiona melted into him, her arms wrapping around his neck, and for a long moment, nothing existed but the two of them and the warmth growing between them. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Preston rested his forehead against hers. Say you will stay. Say you will give this a chance. What about my brother? What about propriety? We will do it right. I will take you to Oregon City to see your brother, explain the situation. We can court properly if that is what you need. But Fiona, I am not letting you walk out of my life. I cannot. Yes, she breathed. Yes, I will stay. I will give this a chance. The next day, Preston hitched up his wagon and they made the slow journey to Oregon City. The roads were treacherous with snow and ice, and the trip that normally took 6 hours stretched to 9. But finally, they reached the bustling settlement, with its lumber mills and busy streets. Thomas Crawford was a tall, thin man with his sister's gray eyes and a worried expression that lifted when he saw Fiona climbing down from Preston's wagon. Fiona, thank God. I have been out of my mind with worry. When you did not arrive and then the storm hit, I feared the worst. He embraced her tightly, then looked at Preston with curiosity. Who is this? Thomas, this is Preston Whitmore. He saved my life when the blizzard trapped me. He has been taking care of me while my ankle healed. Fiona glanced at Preston, her cheeks flushing. And he is courting me. Thomas's eyebrows shot up. Courting you, but you just met. I know how it sounds, Fiona said, but it is the truth, Thomas. I have feelings for him, strong feelings. And I want to stay in Oregon territory, not here in the city, but out at his ranch. Absolutely not, Thomas said immediately. Fiona, you are my sister. I am responsible for you now. I cannot let you go live in the wilderness with a man you barely know. With respect, sir, Preston said calmly, Fiona is a grown woman who can make her own decisions, but I understand your concern. That is why we came here first, to do this properly. I would like your permission to court your sister. We will take our time, do things right, but I will not lie to you. My intentions are to marry her if she will have me. Thomas looked between them, seeing the way they stood close together, the way Fiona's hand had found Preston's. He sighed. Come inside. We need to talk about this properly. They spent the afternoon in Thomas's modest but comfortable home. He was clearly doing well for himself in the lumber business, and his concern for his sister was genuine. But as Preston talked about his ranch, his plans for the future, his feelings for Fiona, Thomas began to soften. I can see you care for her, Thomas said finally. But Fiona, are you sure about this? Living on a ranch is hard work, nothing like the life you knew in San Francisco. I know, Fiona said. But Thomas, I have never felt this way about anyone, and I am not afraid of hard work. I want to build something, to have a life that means something. With Preston, I can do that. Thomas was quiet for a long moment. If this is truly what you want, I will not stand in your way, but I want to see this ranch of yours, Whitmore, and I want regular visits. Fiona is all the family I have left. You have my word, Preston said. You will always be welcome at our home, and we will visit often. Our home, Fiona repeated, and her smile was radiant. They stayed in Oregon City for 2 days, long enough for Fiona to purchase supplies and proper clothing for ranch life. Thomas, seeing how determined his sister was, even helped outfit her with sturdy boots and warm coats. On the second evening, he pulled Preston aside. You hurt her, and I will come after you with everything I have, Thomas said quietly. I would expect nothing less, Preston replied. But I will not hurt her. I love her. After a week, after a moment. Preston met his eyes steadily. I know you think I am crazy, maybe I am, but she is everything I did not know I was looking for. Thomas nodded slowly. Take care of her, that is all I ask. The journey back to the ranch seemed shorter, despite the difficult roads. Fiona sat close to Preston on the wagon seat, and they talked about their plans. He told her about the work that would need to be done come spring, the horses to be broken and cattle to be rounded up. She told him about her ideas for a garden, for chickens and maybe pigs, for making the cabin more of a home. You are sure about this? Preston asked as the cabin came into view. It is not too late to change your mind. I have never been more sure of anything, Fiona said firmly. That night, after they had unloaded supplies and tended to the animals, they sat by the fire and Preston went down on one knee. I know we agreed to court properly, he said. But Fiona Crawford, I cannot wait months or years to make you my wife. I have waited my whole life to find you, and now that I have, I do not want to waste another day. Will you marry me? Fiona's eyes filled with tears. Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes. He slid a simple gold ring onto her finger, one that had belonged to his mother. It is not fancy, he said. It is perfect. They were married 2 weeks later in Oregon City, with Thomas standing up for them and the local minister performing the ceremony. It was a small affair, just a handful of townspeople who knew Preston from his business dealings. But to Fiona, walking down the aisle of the simple church toward the man she loved, it was the most beautiful wedding in the world. Their wedding night back at the ranch was tender and passionate. Preston carried Fiona over the threshold, and she laughed with joy. They made love by firelight, learning each other's bodies, whispering promises and endearments. Afterward, wrapped in each other's arms, Fiona felt a peace she had never known. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you too. Thank you for walking through that blizzard to my door. Thank you for telling me to come in and stay forever." The winter passed, and spring came to the Oregon Territory in a rush of green and wildflowers. Fiona threw herself into ranch life with an enthusiasm that surprised even Preston. She learned to milk cows and gather eggs, to churn butter and preserve vegetables. She planted an ambitious garden and tended it faithfully. She even learned to ride, though her first few attempts ended with her in the dirt, laughing at her own clumsiness. Preston watched her adapt and thrive, and his love for her grew deeper every day. She brought light and laughter to his home, music and conversation to fill the silence. She worked beside him through the long days of spring planting and cattle branding, never complaining about the hard work or the isolation. Thomas visited often, and Fiona treasured those visits, even as she realized that her life was here now, with Preston. Her brother could see how happy she was, how the ranch life suited her, and his initial concerns faded. In early May, they faced their first real crisis. A band of cattle rustlers struck several ranches in the area, including Preston's. They lost 20 head of cattle, a significant loss. Preston was furious, determined to track down the thieves. "Let the law handle it," Fiona begged. "The law is 3 days away in Oregon City. By the time they get here, those rustlers will be long gone." Preston checked his rifle. "I am going after them. Then I am coming with you." "Absolutely not. It is too dangerous." Fiona set her jaw in the stubborn expression Preston had come to know well. "You are not leaving me behind. We are partners, Preston, in everything." They argued, but in the end, Preston knew he could not stop her. They tracked the rustlers for 2 days, finally catching up to them at an abandoned homestead. Preston confronted them, and a tense standoff ensued. But the rustlers, seeing they were outnumbered by the determination in Preston's eyes and the rifle in his hands, decided the cattle were not worth dying for. They surrendered, and Preston and Fiona herded the cattle back home, then rode to Oregon City to report the crime to the marshal. "You were incredible," Preston told Fiona on the ride home. "The way you stood there, fearless, I have never seen anything like it." "I was terrified," Fiona admitted, "but I was not going to let them see it, and I was not going to let anything happen to you." That summer, they worked harder than ever, preparing for the coming winter. Preston taught Fiona to shoot, and she became a decent markswoman with practice. They added to the herd, bought 3 new horses, and made improvements to the cabin. Preston built an addition, creating a separate bedroom and more living space. In August, Fiona realized she was pregnant. She told Preston one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and gold. "We are going to have a baby," she said simply. Preston went very still, then turned to her with wonder in his eyes. "A baby, are you sure?" "I am sure." He pulled her into his arms and held her close, and Fiona felt him trembling. When he pulled back, there were tears in his eyes. "I am going to be a father," he said in amazement. "You are going to be a wonderful father." They told Thomas on his next visit, and he was overjoyed at the prospect of becoming an uncle. He insisted on bringing supplies from Oregon City, baby clothes and blankets, books on child rearing that made Fiona laugh at their outdated advice. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the fall. Fiona continued to work, though Preston became increasingly protective, trying to keep her from any task he deemed too strenuous. They argued about it playfully, with Fiona insisting she was not made of glass. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time," she reminded him. "I am perfectly capable of gathering eggs and weeding the garden. But what if you fall? What if you overexert yourself? Then you will be there to catch me. You always are." Winter came again, and with it, memories of the blizzard that had brought them together. On the anniversary of the night Fiona had stumbled to Preston's door, they stayed up late, reminiscing. "I thought I was going to die that night," Fiona said, her hand resting on her swollen belly. "I could not feel my feet anymore. My hands were numb. And then I saw the light from your window and I knew I had to reach it. It was like a beacon." "You were a beacon for me too," Preston said. "I just did not know it until you arrived. I was so alone, Fiona, so closed off. I thought I wanted it that way, but you opened me up, made me feel again." "We saved each other," Fiona said softly. "The baby came in late February during another snowstorm, though not as severe as the one that had brought Fiona to the ranch. Thomas had arrived a week earlier, not wanting to risk missing the birth, and it was fortunate he had. The midwife they had arranged to have come from Oregon City could not make it through the snow. Preston delivered his own son with shaking hands and Thomas's help, following instructions from one of the books. It was the most terrifying and exhilarating experience of his life. When the baby let out his first cry, strong and healthy, Preston felt something shift fundamentally in his soul. "A boy," he said in wonder, placing the infant in Fiona's arms. "We have a son." Fiona looked down at the tiny, red-faced baby and felt love overwhelm her. "He is perfect. What should we name him?" They had discussed names for months but never quite settled on one. Now, looking at his son, Preston knew. "Daniel, after my father." "Daniel Whitmore," Fiona said, testing the name. "It is perfect." Little Daniel proved to be a healthy, happy baby with his father's dark hair and his mother's gray eyes. Preston was a devoted father, rising in the night to walk the floor with his son when he cried, changing diapers without complaint, singing softly in the rocking chair he had built especially for this purpose. "You are a natural," Fiona told him, watching him cradle Daniel with such gentleness. "I had a good teacher in my own father. I want to be that for Daniel. I want him to know every day how much he is loved." As Daniel grew from infant to toddler, the ranch prospered. Word had spread about Preston's honesty and skill with horses, and he had more business than he could handle. Fiona managed the books and helped with the horse training, proving to have a natural way with animals. Thomas became a regular fixture in their lives, visiting at least once a month and clearly doting on his nephew. When Daniel was 2, Fiona found herself pregnant again. This time, she carried a girl, born in early autumn when the leaves were turning gold. They named her Sarah, after Preston's mother, and she was a quiet, contemplative baby content to watch the world with wide blue eyes. "2 children," Preston said in amazement, holding Sarah while Daniel climbed on his back. "How did I get so lucky?" "We both got lucky," Fiona said. "That blizzard was the best thing that ever happened to me." The years passed in a blur of hard work and deep happiness. Daniel grew into a thoughtful, serious boy who loved horses as much as his father. Sarah was more adventurous, fearless in a way that often gave her parents heart attacks. When Daniel was 5 and Sarah was 3, another son joined the family, named Thomas after Fiona's brother. And 2 years after that, another daughter, Rebecca. Her name chosen deliberately by Preston as a way of laying old ghosts to rest. The cabin had been expanded twice now, with more bedrooms added, and a proper dining room built on. The ranch itself had grown from a modest operation to one of the most successful in the territory. Preston employed 2 ranch hands, young men from Oregon City looking to learn the trade, and Fiona had hired a woman from town to help with the house and children a few days a week. But despite the growth and success, the core of their life remained the same. Every evening after the children were in bed, Preston and Fiona would sit together on the porch or by the fire, talking over the day, making plans, simply enjoying each other's company. The passion between them had never faded, and even after years of marriage, Preston would catch himself watching Fiona as she worked and feel that same tightening in his chest he had felt that first week. "What are you looking at?" she would ask, catching his gaze. "The most beautiful woman in the world, flatterer, truth-teller." Thomas married when Daniel was 8, bringing his new bride to meet the family. Catherine was a lovely woman, kind and sensible, and Fiona welcomed her warmly. 2 years later, Thomas and Catherine had their first child, and the family gatherings became even more joyous, with cousins playing together and the adults watching over them with contentment. One night, when Daniel was 10, he asked his parents how they had met. They were all gathered around the dinner table, the 4 children ranging from Daniel down to little Rebecca at age 3. "Your mother walked through a blizzard to find me," Preston said, smiling at Fiona across the table. "She knocked on my door half frozen, and I took one look at her and knew my life would never be the same." "Was it love at first sight?" Sarah asked, ever the romantic. "It was," Fiona said simply. "Though we did not quite realize it at first, but from that very first moment something felt right. Like I had found the place I was meant to be." "Tell us about the blizzard," Thomas Jr. said, and Preston launched into the story, embellishing it slightly for dramatic effect while Fiona laughed and corrected his exaggerations. The children listened raptly, and when the story was done, Daniel said seriously, "I want to find someone like that someday, someone who makes me as happy as you two are." "You will," Preston assured him, "if you are very lucky and very patient." That night, after the children were asleep, Preston and Fiona stood on the porch looking out at the star-filled sky. It was February again, almost 15 years to the day since that fateful blizzard. "Can you believe it has been 15 years?" Fiona marveled. "It feels like yesterday and a lifetime ago all at once." "Best 15 years of my life," Preston said, pulling her close. "Thank you for staying, Fiona. Thank you for building this life with me. Thank you for opening your door. Thank you for saying stay forever." She turned in his arms to face him. "I love you, Preston Whitmore. More today than yesterday, less than tomorrow." He kissed her then, deep and tender, and Fiona felt the same rush of feeling she had experienced that first time. Some things, she thought, never changed. Some loves were meant to last forever. Inside, one of the children cried out in their sleep, and they went to check, moving through their home with practiced ease. This was their life, Fiona thought. This beautiful, messy, wonderful life they had built together. From a single moment of desperation in a blizzard to this, a family, a home, a love that encompassed everything. Years continued to pass, each one bringing new challenges and joys. When Daniel was 16, he began talking about starting his own ranch someday, and Preston worked with him to teach him everything he knew. Sarah proved to have a gift for working with troubled horses, able to gentle even the most difficult animals with patience and kindness. Young Thomas wanted to work in town like his uncle, fascinated by the business side of ranching, and Rebecca declared she was going to be a teacher like her grandmother had been. Preston and Fiona encouraged all their dreams, knowing their children would forge their own paths. But they also made sure their children understood the value of hard work, of integrity, of treating people with respect. The lessons Preston's father had taught him, he passed on to his own children. Thomas Sr., Fiona's brother, became even more successful in the lumber business, eventually becoming one of the wealthiest men in Oregon City. But success never changed him. He remained close to his sister and her family, and his own children, 3 in total, grew up alongside their cousins, all of them as close as siblings. When Preston turned 45, he looked around at his life and marveled at the journey that had brought him here. From a lonely cowboy living in isolation to a man surrounded by family and love. All because of a blizzard, a knock on his door, and a woman with gray eyes who had changed everything. That evening, at the dinner table surrounded by his children and their chatter, he caught Fiona's eye and mouthed, "I love you." She smiled and mouthed it back, and in that moment, Preston felt a contentment so profound it was almost painful. Later, as they prepared for bed, Fiona said, "What were you thinking about at dinner? You had such an expression on your face." "I was thinking about how lucky I am, how that blizzard brought me everything I could ever want." He pulled her close. "I was thinking about how I told you to stay forever and you did." "Where else would I go?" Fiona asked. "You are my home, Preston. This ranch, our children, this life we built together. This is everything I ever wanted, even before I knew I wanted it." They held each other in the darkness, listening to the sounds of their home settling around them. Outside, snow was beginning to fall, gentle flakes drifting down in the moonlight. But inside, everything was warm and safe. As the children grew older and began leaving to start their own lives, the ranch seemed quieter, but no less full of love. Daniel eventually started his own place 15 miles south, marrying a sweet girl from Oregon City and beginning his own ranching dynasty. Sarah married a horse trainer she met at a stock show and moved to Eastern Oregon, writing long letters home about her adventures. Thomas Jr. went to work with his uncle in the lumber business and thrived there, eventually taking over when Thomas Sr. retired. And Rebecca did indeed become a teacher, taking a position in Oregon City and boarding with her uncle during the week, coming home on weekends. Preston and Fiona, now in their 50s, found themselves alone again for the first time since that fateful winter. But the silence was comfortable, companionable. They still worked the ranch together, though they had hired more help to handle the heavier tasks. They still sat together in the evenings, talking and reading and simply being together. "You ever miss the excitement?" Preston asked one night. "The noise of children, the constant activity?" "Sometimes," Fiona admitted, "but I also treasure this time with you, just the two of us, the way it was in the beginning." "Not quite the way it was in the beginning. We are both a lot grayer now." Preston ran a hand through his hair, which had gone silver at the temples. "I think you are even more handsome now than you were then," Fiona said loyally. "Distinguished. And you are more beautiful. Age has only refined you like good wine." They still flirted like newlyweds, still reached for each other in the night. The physical passion between them had mellowed slightly with age, but the emotional connection had only deepened. They could communicate with a glance, finish each other's sentences, sense each other's moods without words. Grandchildren began arriving, and the ranch came alive again with young voices during visits. Preston proved to be a wonderful grandfather, patient and playful, teaching his grandchildren to ride and rope and respect the land. Fiona doted on each new baby, knitting endless booties and blankets, filling cookie jars whenever grandchildren were expected. On their 25th wedding anniversary, their entire family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. All 4 children came home with their spouses and children. Thomas and Catherine brought their brood, And even some of the old ranch hands Preston had trained over the years showed up to pay their respects. As Preston looked around at the gathered crowd, at the faces of his children and grandchildren, at his brother-in-law and the friends who had become like family, he felt overwhelmed with gratitude. Fiona stood beside him, her hand in his, and he knew she felt the same. "Speech," someone called out, and the cry was taken up by others. Preston held up his hands for quiet. "I am not much for speeches," he began, "but I will say this. 25 years ago, a blizzard blew a woman to my door. I was alone, had convinced myself I liked it that way. But Fiona Crawford changed everything. She brought light and love into my life, gave me a family, built this home with me. Everything good in my life stems from that one night, from the decision to open my door and let her in." He turned to Fiona, his voice thick with emotion. "You are my heart, Fiona. My partner in everything. Thank you for saying yes all those years ago. Thank you for staying forever." Fiona was crying openly now, happy tears streaming down her face. "Thank you for asking me to stay. Thank you for seeing me, really seeing me from that very first night. I love you, Preston Whitmore. I will love you until my last breath and beyond." They kissed to applause and cheers, and the party continued late into the night, filled with laughter and music and love. As the years advanced into their 60s and then 70s, Preston and Fiona gradually turned more of the ranch operations over to Daniel, who had moved back to the home place with his family. They kept a small house on the property, built especially for them, where they could maintain their independence while still being close to family. Preston's health began to fail when he was 73, a slow decline that frustrated him deeply. He had always been so strong, so capable, and the weakness felt like a betrayal. But Fiona was there through it all, caring for him with the same devotion she had shown their entire marriage. "You should not have to see me like this," Preston said one difficult day. "I made a vow," Fiona said firmly. "In sickness and in health. Did you think I would abandon you now? I would not blame you if you did. Then you do not know me very well after all these years." She took his hand. "We are in this together, Preston, until the very end." He rallied for a time, enjoying 2 more years of relative health. They took a trip to San Francisco, something Fiona had wanted to do for years, showing Preston the city of her youth. They visited Oregon City often, watching their grandchildren grow, welcoming new great-grandchildren into the world. They sat on their porch in the evenings, holding hands and watching the sun set over the mountains. "I have had a good life," Preston said one evening. "Better than I ever dreamed possible." "We are not done yet," Fiona protested, but they both knew the truth. When Preston died peacefully in his sleep at age 76, Fiona felt as though part of her soul had been ripped away. The grief was crushing, overwhelming. But she was surrounded by family, by the children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who were Preston's legacy, and they held her up through the darkest days. She lived another 8 years, staying in the little house on the ranch, still active and engaged with her family. She taught her great-grandchildren to bake, told them stories of the old days, kept Preston's memory alive. And every night, she would look at the gold ring on her finger, the one that had belonged to Preston's mother, and talk to him as if he were still there. "I miss you," she would say. "But I know you are waiting for me. I know we will be together again." She died on a February night during a gentle snowfall surrounded by her children. Her last words were, "Tell Preston I am coming home." They buried her next to Preston on a hill overlooking the ranch, with a view of the mountains and the valley below. The headstones were simple but elegant, carved with their names and the years of their lives. And beneath both names, the same inscription: "The blizzard brought us together, and love kept us forever." The ranch continued to thrive under Daniel's stewardship and eventually passed to his children and then to his grandchildren. Each generation added their own touch, their own improvements, but the core remained the same. The original cabin was preserved as a family museum, kept exactly as it had been, a reminder of where it all began. And on winter nights, when the snow fell and the wind howled, family members would gather around fires and tell the story of Preston and Fiona, of the blizzard that brought them together, of the love that built a legacy. They told it to their children and their children's children, keeping the memory alive. The story of a cowboy who opened his door to a stranger in a storm and found his soulmate. The story of a woman who walked through a blizzard and discovered her home. The story of a love that transcended time, that built a family, that created something lasting and beautiful from a single moment of fate. It was a story of courage and chance, of opening oneself to possibility, of saying yes to the unexpected. It was a story of hard work and dedication, of building a life together through good times and bad. It was a story of family and legacy, of values passed down through generations. But most of all, it was a love story, the kind of love that people dream about but rarely find. The kind of love that changes everything. The kind of love that lasts forever. Preston and Fiona Whitmore lived and died, but their love remained, woven into the very fabric of the ranch they built together, carried on in the hearts of every person who came after them. They had started with nothing but a cabin in the wilderness and a chance encounter in a storm. They had built an empire of love, and it all began with a knock on a door, a blizzard, and a cowboy who said the words that changed two lives forever. "Come in. Stay forever."